Here's some eye candy for you to look at while I start my little conversation about the world-famous Pierre Gustafson test. My YouTube pen pal, I guess, Wasky Squirrel, has adopted my world-famous, he's called it the world-famous Pierre Gustafson test. I don't think I called it that before he did, so I'm quoting him. It's world-famous, that test of mine. And what it essentially involves is writing very quickly, or in his case, sort of just making ovals and swishes back and forth, and many people would consider that just scribbling. So we're going to call it scribbling. So the world famous Pierre Gustafson Scribble test. And it exists because it's the easiest way for you and you and you and you and you to see if your pen can keep up with your hand. If you're like me, using the pen for drawing or for calligraphy, or if you're like you and you use it for writing thoughtful words, your hand goes slower most of the time. But once in a while, your hand goes fast. And will your pen keep up with you? We'll find that out with using the world-famous Pierre Gustafson test. By scribbling, you don't have to think about what you want to draw or what you want to write. You just scribble, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, most of the time, you will not be writing fast. You'll be writing slowly, and I'll be drawing carefully, and it won't, you won't have a problem. But sometimes you might. And where you might find it most evident when you're doing your usual thoughtful writing is when you sign your name. Because when you sign your name, you're not spelling it, you're not thinking about it, your hand knows how to make your signature without you even thinking. You just do it. And most of us sign our names in a very abbreviated way. You might have something that looks kind of like a capital letter of your first name, and then a slash and a dot. That tends to work for most of us these days. Now, how big and what your capital letter is, and how long is that slash, and where you put that dot, or make that other slash that represents a T in your name, is dependent on what your name actually is. But the common thing with all of our names and everything is that we do it fast. We write and we're done. And sometimes you might write a little slower, and you might write more of the letters than, and you might write all of the letters, and you will find that chances are you won't have a skipping pen if you are careful about making sure you didn't forget the last letter of your first name. Anyway, Wasky did the famous Pierre Gustafson test on his most recent video, and the reason that these keep moving is because my desk is at a slant, and it's at a slant it's listing toward the bow here at about 5 degrees, and this paper is rather slippery, so these slide down. Here, let's put a dam up. That'll keep the deluge. Anyway, one person commented, regarding the final test, sorry, I have no idea how to spell the name. I felt the pen can go... Then he continues, I feel if the pen can go approximately 50%, it's quite good. 75% is amazing, and 100% is spectacular. 50% is still much faster than anyone can write in normal circumstances. A pen that gets ink starved during normal writing is frustrating beyond belief. Fortunately, I've not had much of that in the pens that are not in my regular rotation. Well, in the Waskey's test he did looks something like this, and I have no idea whether my pen will pass that test or not, but he did a row of this, about this big, maybe a little less big, and then he did a row like that, and you can see it's skipping, and then he did some other scribbles. Now, why did it skip here? Why did my old pen skip there? I don't know, but I'm going to figure that out. Because it's not supposed to do that. But it's doing that right now, and I have to figure out why. In general, though, I want to explain something. During a pen show here in Boston that I produced as part of the entertainment, shall I say, I did a number of things. One of the things I did was I had a couple of pen commercials from radio era before TVs. There was a Waterman ink commercial and the Waterman commercial for the Waterman Stately Taper-Right pen that looks like this. And the ink ad was very funny, though. I wish I could find it. Actual tests prove, and it had that announcer that, you know, that they don't have anymore, where that he speaks very loudly. He actual tests prove that Waterman ink, Waterman, and he, you know, used the word Waterman about 500 times in the 30 seconds. Anyway, I had that going on. I had some large paintings I did of pens that were somewhat comical to make people smile. I made fortune cookies that had pen fortunes inside that I had printed up and produced, and I passed them out at the table so people opened them up and they would see, you know, Confucius say, man needs deep pockets to hold Parker Black Giant, which of course you need a big pocket to hold the actual pen, and you also need deep pockets to buy one because they're expensive. And so anyway, those were going on, and I also had a little table for the Pen Olympics. And I thought, you know, let's find out what the finest nib in the entire room is. And so I had a little piece of paper with the word fine written at the top, and then people would bring over to that table and fill it with ink and then make the line and see how fine it was. And some people would come by with their extra fine, whatever it is, and it was way broader than the fine that this might have had. The old pens, I think, had finer fines than the modern ones do. Another one was the broadest nib. So who had the broadest nib in the room? Who had the most flexible nib in the room? And then we had a beauty contest. Which was the ugliest pen. Now the ugly pen was either genetically ugly or ugly by some sort of trauma that happened to it. A pen covered with teeth marks might have been in the ugly contest. And one was ugliness that happened in an attempt to make it beautiful. And it's like, you know, wearing too much makeup might turn you into the natural beauty is gone, and then you turn into this cartoon of a human. So there were 3 different ugly, and that was kind of neat. So it was a fun little thing that I did 20 years ago when I ran this show, that to make people smile. And one of the tests was for modern pens, and I said, well, I need to do something for a modern pen. And my pen pal from New Hampshire said, which modern pen skips the least? And that was exactly right. All modern pens skipped. And he doesn't write this way. He writes very slowly and methodically. He doesn't do this kind of thing, but he tried enough modern fountain pens at the time to have that problem. And many of us did feel that that was a flaw, and I'll explain why in 1 minute. To just gather my thoughts. In order for this pen, this is a pen from the 20s, in order for this pen to make a broad line, it can make a fine line easy, but to make a broad line, there has to be that much ink right at the bow, right at the front. And so feeds, the part of the pen that's underneath the nib is called a feed. The feed had to have ink stored there. And that's why these little teeth are there. And that's why the Waterman spoon feed has these big divots. See this? These, come on, get in focus. The spoon feed, the Waterman spoon feed, has probably the most ink storage available at the nib. It's just space. It's a shelf. The Waterman spoon feed, or a spoon that's full of ink, ready to go right onto your paper. Presumably when you want it to go on your paper. But any pen that has ink sitting right up here next to the nib, below the nib, can do this by a shake. And I didn't, swing it backhand around me, and I didn't, I'm not throwing a shot put or throwing a fastball. I just went like that, a little bit faster than that, but and I got ink all over my document or all over my suit. And one of the things that all pens manufactured up until the ballpoint was invented and people forgot how to use a pen, most fountain pens had ink right up there where we needed it, so that you could make your fancy signature. You could draw. You could write broad so you can see it if your eyes required a broad nib. So the ink had to be right there, and it also had to flow from back here to right there. So when you are making your signature or writing your letter or doing whatever you're doing with your pen, that when you're done with the ink that's stored up here, more ink is coming down. So the channel that I'll just show you here again. The channel, it's like the Suez Canal there. It's deep, and it's also has a lot of ink that can come from the barrel into the nib. A modern fountain pen, I'm just going to take, this was given to me by Goldspot Pens to do a drawing, and I did a drawing with it, and I didn't win the prize, but they gave me this pen. Thank you, Goldspot. Anyway, what I did was I took this out this morning, and that's why my hands are full of ink, to show you, get your electron microscope out there and see if you can find the channel. There is a slightly incised line, and that's supposed to deliver the ink to the nib. I ask you, that's supposed to do the work? Yeah, there's ink back here where you don't need it. I mean, yes, you need ink there too, I suppose, and further back into the cartridge or the converter or the rubber sack, but you need it here. You need it right there next to that point. And I don't know how it's supposed to get there through that. I mean, there's room for maybe one molecule of ink at a time to go through that slit up to the point where it's needed. And of course it's going to skip unless you write really slow, and then it won't skip. Anyway, the famous Pierre Gustafson test, the reason that it exists, and the reason that I asked Wasky Squirrel to do the test was because he is a lover of pens, new and old, and at all price points, as he says every episode of his channel, is that I was curious whether these days, when fountain pens are manufactured by many, many more companies now, and there are many, many more sketchers and artists and calligraphers and all sorts of people that are collecting pens and writing with pens and journaling with pens and drawing with pens, that maybe modern manufacturers now are going back to a feed that will actually work and deliver the ink from here to there so you can put it onto the page. Now, in my mind, there's always going to be the danger of that happening. But the only way, as far as I can tell, the only way that a pen can make a line that is broad and full of ink when you want it is to have the ink where you need it. And that also means that if you jiggle it or shake it to some sort of force, I don't know what force is needed to make this happen, but it can happen. And so I think that this always has to be a danger, Will Robinson, when you're using a pen that actually will work. So you learn not to shake it. Even though it looks like, I can't walk 3 feet without getting covered in ink, I don't have this problem when I'm actually using the pen. It doesn't happen. Okay, let's say you don't care about thick lines, and you write very carefully, and you don't care, you don't need that. You just write very, very slowly and methodically, and you think about every word you're going to write, and you think about every letter that's in that word so you don't misspell it, and you cross your T exactly where it belongs, and you dot your I exactly above the I, not next to the E, not above the E, but above the I where it belongs. You cross your T, you make your T, enough to show that it's a T. You don't do that. You don't make a big line, and you dot your I, and you don't have a paraph on the end of your name. A paraph is what John Hancock, John Hancock. And then this part underneath here, that was called a paraph, and that was to thwart forgers. A forger could write this part easy, but this thing evidently was hard to copy, and this was proving to King George that John Hancock, not an imposter, signed this thing, so he's the one that has to be strung up on the yardarm. But, so this is written fast. The signature might be written fast, but this usually is written fast as part of thwarting forgers. So, why am I telling you this? It'll come to me in a second. For me to write, to make a fine line, if I'm writing slowly, the finest line that I can make with this pen is going to be a certain width. And even if I barely touch the paper and I lift up on the pen, it's going to be, the finest line will be a slightly thinner width to it. But if I want the finest line, I have to do a third thing. I have to start with a fine nibbed pen, I have to write very lightly, and I have to go, I have to write fast. I have to make a line that goes right across the page. I have to make a line that's that fast. I'm doing a series of portraits right now, and the drawing is about this big, about 12 inches tall, that I'm drawing, and I'm making a line in the background like this. Now I can, if I write slowly, this straight line starts having little bumps to it, and hesitations and wavering stuff. So I have to write fast to not only make a fine line, but to make it straight. And I'm not using a ruler. I'm just using my hand, my arm. I'm using my arm. I'm not using my hand. If I use my hand, I could go that far, but I'm making it long, so I'm using my whole arm. And to make it fine, I have to just barely touch the paper, and I have to go fast. So the Pierre Gustafson test, again, for me, is to see whether this pen and this ink delivery system, the feed and the everything, will work fast. So and I think for most of us that use the pen only, not for calligraphy, not for drawing, but only to write a letter or to sign a check or to keep in your diary, dear diary. Here, none of that even says dearest diary, dear diary, D-I-A-R-Y, dear diary, comma. Comma. See, I'm thinking and I'm writing smaller, and I'm writing slower and smaller, and I'm still trying to write calligraphically, so you see some fast swishiness going on. Oh, how swishy my writing has become. Swish. S-W, can I spell it? S-W-I-S-H-Y. Swishy. So, most of the time in your writing, you're not going to be writing fast. You're not going to be writing in a shaded way, but your signature that you write, your big capital P and your small I-E-R that turns into a line and a dot, that's probably the fastest you're going to write, is your signature. So you could forget my test and just do your signature test, because you're writing very quickly. You're not thinking about what you're doing. Presumably you know your name, you know how to spell it, but more importantly, you know how to make your signature, which often has nothing to do with lettering or spelling. It's a scribble like this, except it's your scribble. So try your name. Write your name, your signature, rather, not your name. Write your signature. Draw your signature. Essentially what you're doing is you're drawing a symbol that represents you. It's a portrait. Draw your selfie with your pen, and if it skips, throw the pen away. It won't work for you. If you can't take a selfie with your pen, what is the use of it? What do you think? Am I not only covered in ink, but crazy? Or am I covered in ink and making sense? You decide. Bye.